Our last speaker of the morning is someone that we're very honored to have, particularly because of the title of this conference, which is the International Space Development Conference. He is Alain Bensoussan, and I will give you a little bit of background before we call him up. Dr. Bensoussan will be addressing the issue of international perspectives of space exploration and development. Dr. Bensoussan served from 1999 to 2002 as the chairman of the European Space Agency Council, and from 1996 to 2003 was the president of the French National Space Agency, CNES. He currently serves as the director of the International Center for Decision and Risk Analysis and the Distinguished Research Professor of Operations Management at the University of Texas at Dallas. He was full professor at the University Paris-Dauphine since 1972 and emeritus professor since 2004. He was also chairman of the mathematics department at the University of Paris-Dauphine and the president of INRIA, the Institut National de Recherche en Informatique et Automatique de 1984 to 1996. You know, we try hard to get the international perspective at the International Space Development Conference, and we're very lucky to have Dr. Bensoussan address us. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Bensoussan.
Thank you very much, George, and let me first indeed express my thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this venue in Dallas of ISDC. And I want really to say that I did not know much about ISDC. I've been very much impressed by this conference and more generally by the activities of NSS. And it is indeed the first time I'm participating, and right away I registered to the next venue in Washington. And also I took my membership to NSS. As you said, John, I'm now living in Texas, so I can be considered as a local. You can hear my accent. And I fully agree that ISDC deserves to attract more representatives from the international space community, as indeed the word international in the title of the conference indicates. And we discussed that, and if I can be of any help, I would be delighted to do so, because it's very surprising that this amount of expertise and interesting presentation is so little known outside the United States. In fact, I understand this session was totally devoted to international cooperation. I would not have been the only one participating. And eventually, after many changes, that's the situation that we have. In fact, we had at the beginning of the week here in Dallas, Dr. Kasturi Rangan, the former president of the Indian Space Research Organization. Unfortunately, he cannot stay till Sunday, but he gave me, I can say a few words about what they are doing in India. Not representative, but he gave me some elements. So in my talk, I will mostly address the issue of international cooperation, and I will try to convey some recommendation which comes from my experience. But right away, I want to say that I have no responsibility anymore in the space domain. The bad thing is that I may not have the most accurate information. The good thing is that I'm free to speak, and I'm not bounded by any politically correct speech. Okay? And in fact, the talks that I heard in participating to this conference helped me a lot to fix my ideas. And I've seen in particular, I want to stress that NASA has an approach which must be commended. And NASA is really doing its best efforts to successfully involve international partners and has been drawing lessons from the past in a way which has to be recognized. So what I can add is maybe just to stick to a few points which may, in my view, have not been considered sufficiently from my perspective. And before I proceed, I also would like to say that in France, we know what we owe to NASA. And we fully acknowledge and remember the help of NASA in the beginning of the French space program in the early 60s, when we sent, when I say we, I mean I had no responsibility in those days, of course, but the French people in charge of French space program sent a lot of people to be trained by NASA, and that has been very important in order to have the experts to build the French space program. So we don't forget that. And as Stephen Squires said yesterday in his remarkable presentation, NASA has always been a great space agency and remains a reference worldwide. So here in this first slide, you see the 3 points I want to address. The issue of how to get sustained political support, it's beyond international, but it's particularly important in those days because we need an international political support. What lessons can be learned from the past in this matter, in particular, the very important example of International Space Station? What can we learn from this important international endeavor? And some suggestions that I may make about international cooperation in order to be successful. So next slide. Now, indeed, we have a problem, and I guess we probably will all agree on the fact that the political support to the space exploration program is not at the level of what is at stake. And why? Because if we consider what is of interest to politicians, well, we don't see in the space exploration program something close to their traditional motivations. Why politicians will be interested? It's very costly. There is little commercial interest. It has been just said in the previous panel. And politicians think in short terms, political results. So this is obviously something extremely long term. So we don't see any compelling motivation why we will get a strong political support. Next slide. And in addition, such a program, a space exploration program, faces huge political challenges because of the duration of such a program, initiative, I don't know how we can call it. And if we consider the comprehensive program in all its components, and of course, because of the cost which is involved. So it's very important, in view of the difference of duration between the lifetime of such a program and the lifetime of politicians, that it be independent, not dependent on political changes. Therefore, beyond, it means that we must have very strong public support, which lasts for the time which is needed. It must be bipartisan, outside any political position. It must involve very strong scientific support, definitely, and this should be worldwide. In other words, really, we need full worldwide support. Okay, next slide. So, what can we learn from the past? Some lessons. It's very clear that, for me, really what has been breakthrough decisions concerning major space program originate from a very strong political decision at president's level. It's, everybody refers to President Kennedy's speech, but it's true also for the decision concerning starting the Freedom Platform, and which became ISS, where it's international, but the particular situation between the Soviet Union, which collapsed into Russia and the United States, this political element played a very important role in the evolution of ISS. But at the same time, we see that the follow-on has been a little bit not so well planned. Probably stopping the program Apollo and the changes, the decision can be debated. Today with ISS, although we hear of what we can do with ISS, it's still that the new goal to ISS is obviously needed if we are honest in approaching the situation. Now, concerning the financing, the planning of the financing and scheduling of ISS, well, it could have been better. So, next slide. So, we can, of course, go on and mention, if I, for instance, mention international perspective, in particular the European one, it's true that we are worried in Europe about the decision to terminate the shuttle in 2010, because we will have our lab up there, and the problem of accessing to it, to have scientists making their experiments, is the solution of this problem is not so clear today. Maybe it's for a few years, but nevertheless, it's a lapse of 5 years. It's an important matter. But of course, we can recognize ISS has been a tremendous success in merging culture and having people working together, and that's a great thing. Questions about the scientific use of ISS, of the applications. This is also a matter of debate. I don't want to be too critical about that, but it's clear that maybe it has not been overwhelming. And now the public interest in the ISS seems to be limited. So we have a situation where for the space exploration program, we need some push which is at the level of the one that President Kennedy has given in '61. We have a speech of President Bush in January 14, 2004, it's certainly an excellent thing, and I wish we could have a similar speech in Europe. But since then, what has been done is mainly at the level of space agencies, in particular NASA. It's a great job, again, certainly. In particular, I appreciate, as I said, the way NASA is approaching the issue. This idea of a coordination framework with 14 agencies is a great thing and must be acknowledged. But for instance, I was surprised to see that there is no mention of a space exploration program in the document describing the US National Space Policy, which was issued on August 31st, 2006. It may be not a document to talk about that, but if it were so overwhelmingly important, it could have been mentioned. Now, in Europe, no political announcement whatsoever concerning space exploration program. The agencies work, but no political indication whatsoever. So this is a fact, reality, and if we compare that with what is at stake, what we have to do, it's certainly a reason to worry. So the main challenge, I think, is really how do we achieve the main challenge, which is not technical, of course, which is political, is how to achieve, to realize an international political backing at the level of presidents and prime ministers of a few countries, which is similar to what has been done in '61 by President Kennedy. So next slide. My suggestion would be to use the G8 summit. Don't know if everybody is familiar with that, G8. This G8 is G7 plus 1. In fact, the 1 is Russia, and G7 is summit is at the level of President of United States and a few major countries, a few from Europe, Canada and Japan. And now there is Russia. So I think this is a good probably channel to get something which is agreed at this level, which I guess there may be other ideas, but this one is probably one which deserves to be considered, because they adopt in these meetings simple but highly political objectives, and then it has to be fulfilled. And we need simple presentation, simple objective, but very high level. And personally, I was very convinced that by what has been suggested yesterday by Paul Spudis. And for instance, a simple sentence like, we are going to the moon, it could be to Mars also, of course, to learn how to live in a different world. This is a kind of objective goal sentence which can be adopted at this level, and it will be extremely useful to proceed from that. Now, the idea of human civilization has been mentioned, and it's something which can be considered at this level also, because on Earth today we see rather the conflict of civilization. So how do we proceed with that? Of course, here in this slide you see I'm mentioning other aspects which need to be put on as a complement. Well, concerns climate change, energy, health, education, and so on, natural hazards. But this should come as a complement to very simple goals which have a very, very important and high-level political content. So, of course, what is adopted at this summit is not something which comes naturally. A lot of preparation has to be done to achieve the decision of that kind. And it is our role, NSS and all the societies and agencies, it's our role to convince those who are preparing these summits to accept space exploration or space at large as a topic of such a meeting. It has not been done so far. And it's very important that the proposal comes from the US president in view of the role of the United States in this context. And next slide. We need US leadership, and it is needed, and it is accepted. It is acceptable, of course, with some elements, but it cannot be denied in view of the difference of budgets and the effort which is done in this country. People say maybe it's not a lot, but compared to other countries, it's substantial. But it's very important that we pay attention to this idea of equal partnership. I referred to Dr. Kasurarangan, the former president of ISRO, Indian Space Research Organization, and in my discussion with him, he said, India will join such a program. We'll go with the United States, Europe, no doubt, but on a basis of equal partnership. What does it represent exactly remains to be studied, because, of course, difference of budget implies some differences, but at the very least, it's very important to understand the interest of the partners, to respect their position, and to build a program which obtains a consensus. So this is something which has to be worked out. It's maybe easy to say it, and it's harder to fulfill it, but nevertheless, it's some indication of what that type of direction which would work. So next slide. To proceed, I said we have to prepare that. How do we do that? Of course, we have to develop the contents, obviously, to be convincing, and we see in this conference debates about what should be done, and we have to finally achieve a program which achieves an international consensus. So one way there is the work of the agencies, which I have mentioned. These 14 agencies is clearly an extremely important background. There is the work and debate done at the level of NSS or various societies. But personally, I would like to stress the attention of the model which is International Panel for Climate Change, IPCC. This is remarkable, and personally, I've been very impressed. I guess most of the people in the audience know IPCC, International Panel for Climate Change. I'm personally very impressed by the authority of this panel. It's a panel of independent people, and the impact of their recommendations. And it's probably will be maybe a unique case in the history in which a very important debate matter for mankind will originate from a debate developed at the level of International Panel for Climate Change. It's not a political body, it's a body of experts. And what they produce is looked by politicians, and more is the basis of what the decision making at political level. So I think it's a good model. So it does not duplicate what is done at the level of agencies. The coordination framework could be discussed by experts of that in such a panel, amended, approved, and what is very important is these people are totally independent and fully recognize. Agencies are not independent, obviously, whatever be their try to be perfectly unbiased, but nevertheless they are agencies, and societies may favor such and such idea and so on. We need some kind of independent body which is recognized as independent, and it does not duplicate again the work, but it becomes an authority to finally steer the political decision. Now, to conclude, I want also to stress two aspects which probably have not been very much considered, and only a little bit during the conference, and in the international context are very important. The main one I want to discuss is industrial policy. Well, by industrial policy I mean many things, but there are industrial interests. We cannot hide them. We have to address them. And it's very important that we consider and discuss them. I don't have the time, or I don't have the competence to make very precise recommendation in this aspect, but I would like just to mention that from my point of view, I think an industrial policy should be based on the mix of competition at international level, together with the idea of fair return. So when you put two things which are contradictory together and you want to compromise, it's not easy. But I guess in general, industrial policy is considered with purely the fair return. We want our money back. Or you say full competition, because that competition, you get better, cheaper missions and so on. We cannot, I mean, either of them can be accepted in eliminating the other one. So we have to find a good compromise between these two ideas, and it's tough. Know that from even in Europe, it's Europe, but still several countries, different countries with different industries, and the European Space Agency works, unfortunately, with the principle of fair return. I mean, we want our money back, and it is tough to take decisions at the level of a council of that sort. And they try to implement this type of compromise I'm speaking about, but it's not an easy thing. And at international scene beyond Europe, with United States, Europe, and Japan, and other countries, I can realize that it's extremely difficult, but we cannot avoid it. We cannot avoid it. The other one is security and defense matters. We have not been really very much considering the issue of defense in the context of it has to be addressed. What's the connection between defense matters and what we are talking about? So to conclude, I just want to say and to advocate efforts to expand the cooperation between US and Europe. Of course, international at large, but I think that US and Europe must develop some kind of solidarity. And space is a very good area to increase this cooperation. A lot exists, it has been mentioned, and the relation between NASA and ESA are excellent, and there is no doubt about that. It's an extremely good background, but nevertheless, it's not enough. There is a lot to be done to increase that at level of agencies, scientific and industrial levels. So we have to increase our efforts in this direction. And from my point of view, I'll be delighted, of course, to help or to make suggestions and in order that this makes progress. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.
I think we have time for a few questions. If you have a question, maybe you can go to the two mics here. And why don't we start off over here to the left?
Those of us in the United States that are interested in commercial space have a really big problem. And that problem is our space agency, NASA. They're not only anti-competitive, they're anti-commercial space. And their new architecture, Area 185, is even less inclusive than the space shuttle. With the space shuttle, you had components like Iris from the Italians, MPW from the Italians. You had the commercial side with SpaceHab and SpaceHab modules. But the new architecture is totally exclusive of everybody outside NASA DoD. So my question to you is, for those of us who want to go into space in the US that can't work here, how do we entertain partnerships, corporate-wise, government-wise, in Europe?
I mean, you want, not sure, is it how to work with Europe, and maybe you can make precise a little bit more the question.
Doing business with European companies.
Oh, okay.
In order to accelerate
okay.
commercial development of space.
Okay, I got it, yes. Yeah, this is the issue. So this question stresses the importance of industrial policy, which I mentioned, right? And it hasn't been very much addressed. How do you do business when you are in industry in Europe, and vice versa, of course, for European industry in the United States? So, this idea of, which I mentioned, of mix between international competition and fair return implies that US industry should have access to European programs and vice versa. And I think in order to go beyond the limitation due to agencies or DoD or whatever, of course, ITA is a different thing. It's a different issue, but it's different from industrial interest and fair return. I guess if a decision of that kind, the principle of this mix can be adopted at the same time that this G8 summit could consider space exploration, and at the same time mention the principle of the fact that your programs, US or Europe, should be accessible at an international level for competition.
That's exactly my point. They're not accessible. The Europeans have been excluded. American free enterprise has been excluded. So if we're both excluded, how can we work together in Europe?
Yeah, that's what I want to change. I mean, a change of that sort has to come at very high political level, because these are political limitations. Industry want to work together, but or to participate to programs, but it's forbidden by by political decision, right? In the US and in Europe. So this has to be changed. This has to be changed, and it can be changed only at a very high political level. That's what. So I agree with you. Today it's very limited, and it's a drawback for everybody. But also industry tries to protect itself. It's understandable, and they want their own market. So there are a lot of interest. Only it has to be settled at a very high political level. Otherwise, it will not work. I hope.
Thank you. Can we get the next question on the right here?
Yeah. In legend, a long time ago, Prometheus brought us fire. But there are forces out there today, and I remember back in the 60s, their whole goal is to put out all the fires. Their current presentation is this whole global warming agenda that's out there that basically wants to send all the money directly to the poor and does not want to go ahead and invest in technology. The other thing is, when you get to the moon, a major factor that's missing totally from your presentation was the pride of being the first on the moon. So my two questions, it's a paired question. What can we do to bring back pride to the space program? And the second piece of that is, international cooperation is great. We've had astronauts stranded in the ISS, it's not for it. But what can we do for, you're saying pair up with the global warming people, but some of those people are the very ones who are trying to get rid of all the technology.
Yeah, okay. No, it's a very valid question. Well, in the case of, if we look at the situation when President Kennedy made his speech, this was not international cooperation. Obviously, it was a U.S. issue. There was a
President Bush was virtually ignored in the media when he made a similar proclamation to go to Mars, to go back to the moon.
Yeah, okay. But on the, okay, right. But at the same time, I guess people agree at all levels, including political levels, that that space exploration program with going to the moon and Mars and so on today is an international endeavor. It's some objective for mankind. So people accept this idea. So we are not in the same situation. The only thing is we have to find, I think, from my perspective, we have to find motivation on which presidents of a few countries agree together on the need to partner in such a endeavor. So if United States can do it by itself, fine, they will do it. But apparently does not seem to be totally the case. NASA, for instance, says that they want to have international involvement, international cooperation. What they do with these 14 agencies is a clear sign of that. They will not develop a space exploration program just by themselves. And then this...
I guess my question is always more, it's not so much the international cooperation, but basically the watering down of the program is becoming less important. The pride is gone. So how do you bring the pride back? Because that gets you the motivation.
Well, the pride is, of course, also must be compatible with what we can do. So, of course, it's again, if a country can do it by itself, it will get the pride and the fame and so on. But since it does not seem to be possible, then we have to approach by different aspects. So I'm proning this solidarity between Europe and the US as an element which probably will be extremely fruitful. Pride is something, but also pride of succeeding such a mission. We have to be successful, right? And we have to be successful. So we are not in 61. Situation totally different. and what are the motivation of politicians today to do something. I think this idea of human civilization revisited and this idea of really living in a different world, and it's something which is probably has some flesh to steer new approaches which could be fruitful. We have to find something anyway, so I totally agree with you. What are the elements today to get a space exploration program as a successful program with sufficient funding and not delayed for many decades? Okay? That's all ideas are needed. I try to allude to some from my experience and my perspective and from my point of view in Europe. But of course, it's a matter of debate. But we have to do something better. Pride is an important element, but probably more noble, like civilization and so on. We hear all the time about terrorism. That's all what we hear today, right? Terrorism. We have to find something else to change the ideas, and space provides certainly the possibility of thinking to other efforts at the level of mankind, at the world. I hope I've answered a little bit to what you were saying, asking, but I'm not sure. But that's what I can say anyway.
Terrific. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions, which should work out well. So we'll start over here, and then we can go.
Wouldn't a better first step towards a G8 type consensus statement on space, better than trying to get an agreement on an overarching moon type thing, is to pick something that is more relevant to all the countries in the world, like a statement saying we're going to join together and each put in a few $1 million to search for near-Earth objects. In some sense, that's a theme that everyone, every country in the world needs to have some concern about, whether to avoid future tsunamis or places or whatever. And it has a joint defense pulling together. And not only that, it's an order of magnitude cheaper than the other one. Since even millions of dollars would do a lot more than it's being done now, which is very, very different.
Okay, no, I'm not totally agree. I mean, the issue I mentioned in one of my slides is issue, obviously, of natural hazards and environmental problems and global warming, and certainly, in fact, we see these topics considered, and I mentioned myself this IPCC. It's something that it's impressive, and in other words, there are political elements, but nevertheless, it is a situation where finally a body of international experts play a significant role in the political decision making. So this is it's a unique fact in the history, I think, and I was referring to it because it could be a model for us. Of course, there are simple objectives, I mentioned that, which have a high political content, like we do together, we want to live in a different world and we have to do that together. But of course, the problems on Earth exist, and they have to be included in this common effort. It makes a lot of sense. My point was the following: what are the channels today? What are they? There are not so many. United Nations is one channel with all of the difficulties that we know. Direct relation between it worked, ISS, it was obvious that it worked with the United States and Russia. What else do we have? G8 is an interesting channel. But all what I say, if there are other channels where president, prime minister meet and decide we will do something together, then fine. But we have to find exactly that. It cannot. My point is that the work done at the level of agencies is not sufficient. It's not sufficient. It's great. It's a good background, but it will not be sufficient for what is at stake. So we have to find different channels, additional channels at a much higher level. What are they? There are not so many.
Great. And the last question.
Hi, you didn't have one again. I'm addressing the same question, which is you're talking about channels, you're talking about coming up with a mission statement of how to convince the G8. Right now, there's a lot of interest, particularly in Europe, in climate change. And there's lots of media attention coming up this summer about climate change. Can you talk about possibly a one-line mission statement about the benefit of space to help the issues related to climate change? Because I think that's a great selling point.
Now, your question is of course, refers to space at large, and one of the application is the role of space to monitor environment and climate change. Dr. Kasurirangan had made a remarkable speech in the beginning of the week at the At-Week meeting, describing how India is going to use space to help the problems of a country like India, which of course refer to environment, but also to education, to health, and so on and so forth. This is perfect. My point was space exploration. Why do we go to Mars? Why do we go to the moon? Why do we go to asteroid? It costs a lot of money. It's different from the use of space for climate change, which is more so. And if we want to convince politicians that it's useful to go to Mars, it makes a lot of sense, and so on, we have to do something which is not exactly the type of thing that we will do for use of space in climate change. But the things are not contradictory. I mean, they help each other. But a program of space exploration, it's not immediately related to climate change, right? So it's different. So we are doing that for different purposes. So that's it. So my point was mostly space exploration, not space at large. Okay.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much for a fantastic presentation. Please join me in thanking Dr. Bensoussan.
Thank you.